Hello, my name is Robert Dean Steele, and this is your daily Bible class or commentary on the Bible. Today we're looking at Matthew chapter 5, now listen to this, verse number 43 to the end of the chapter, where Jesus basically says, "You've heard it said, love your friends and hate your enemies. But I now tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you'll become the children of your Father in heaven." Now, here is Jesus completely reversing an Old Testament thought, or maybe a thought of that day. Now, we were back in those days, they said, well, you're supposed to love those who are in your acquaintance, but hate your enemies. Jesus says, no, 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 no. This is what God actually says. You are to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He says, in this way, you become the children of your Father in heaven. He's basically turning the whole world upside down. Now, Jesus, of course, said, how will people know that you're his disciples? By the way that you love one another. Jesus, later on in this book, with Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 to 40, would say this. He would say, you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. Now, what will happen when you love God? What happens is you begin to see yourself the way that God sees you. You say, how does God see me? Well, Peter puts it so beautifully. He says, you are a royal nation, a holy people, a unique called out bunch of people. You are kings and priests unto God. That's who you are. And when you see that, that gives you the ability to love one another. Now, listen to this. He says this, for he makes the sun to shine on both the good and bad people alike, and gives rain to those who are good and those who are evil. He says God basically is no respecter of person. God brings rain and also sunshine on both the evil and on the good. You see, God has certain principles, and there's a principle of grace, a principle of love. John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. You're basically to have the same idea and the same view that God does. People are good, people are bad, but they are to be loved unconditionally. That's how we're to love them. We're supposed to love them with no strings attached. He says, why should God reward you for only loving the people who love you? Even the tax collectors do that. So Jesus basically says, you're looking for reward for loving people? He says, even the worst type of people. He was talking to the tax collectors and all the people, yeah, they're pretty bad. But he says, no, you are to love them, because even those who are evil love those who will basically love them. He says, instead, he says, and if you speak only to your friends and have done anything out of the ordinary, even the pagans do that. You must be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, of course, many people have interpreted this last statement to be, well, you got to walk around in perfection. That's not what he was talking about here. He was talking about love. Even the pagans and tax collectors and people who are the worst are going to reciprocate love to those who have been given to them. He says, no, you are to be perfect in love as God has called you to be perfect. I love what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. He says this, you are to love with a love that is with no strings attached. He says, when you love the way that God wants you to love, you receive, you produce, and you are of real value. But if you don't love the way that God wants you to love, then basically you produce, receive, and are actually of no value. Paul, at the end of 1 Corinthians 13, which is called the love chapter, says in 13:13, he says this, these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. So today, love. Now, in the next chapter, Jesus will actually start teaching about what you need to do in the expression of love. But today, remember, you and I are to call to love even those that don't love us. Now, remember, you say, how can I do that? It's very simple. Every day, make the choice that no matter what happens to you today, you are going to instantaneously to forgive. You see, what we often do is when we're offended is we get hurt and then we begin to nurse the hurt. We begin to rehearse it and make a mountain out of a molehill. But instead, what you need to do is first of all, give it to God. And that way you can disperse it to Him. That's what you need to do today. Just a couple of thoughts on love. This has been your daily Bible class or the commentary on the Bible. And tomorrow we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 6 and about how to walk with love. My name is Robert Dean Steele. You have yourself a great and godly day.